He thought it was love, until he saw the truth. Mateo Sandoval was barely 23 years old when his life took a turn that no one, absolutely no one, could have predicted. A literature student at the University of Barcelona, he lived in a tiny apartment in the Gracia neighborhood, sharing the cramped space with two other classmates who, like him, barely managed to pay rent at the end of the month. It was a March afternoon, gray and melancholic, when Mateo accepted an extra job that would change his life forever. A classmate, Lucia, had gotten some shifts as a waiter at corporate events and needed someone to substitute for her at a charity reception at one of Barcelona's most luxurious hotels, the Gran Hotel Catalonia. It's just serving canapés and champagne for 3 hours. Mateo, they pay €50 an hour, Lucia insisted, knowing exactly what would be the most persuasive argument for a student surviving on instant noodles and reheated coffee. Mateo accepted without thinking twice. €150 meant decent food, maybe even buying that rare Garcia Marquez book he so desired, and there would still be a bit left over to pay the overdue electricity bill. When he arrived at the event, wearing a borrowed suit that was slightly too big in the shoulders, Mateo felt completely out of place. The hall was full of elegant people, businessmen in tailored suits, women adorned with jewelry that probably cost more than he would earn in his entire life, and an atmosphere of sophistication that seemed to whisper, "You don't belong here," with every step he took on the Persian carpet. It was while circulating with a tray of smoked salmon canapés that his eyes found her. Sitting alone in a burgundy velvet armchair, near the windows that offered a stunning view of the illuminated city, was a woman with hair as white as snow, gathered in an elegant bun. Her face displayed the marks of age with dignity, deep wrinkles around her eyes that suggested a whole life of smiles and tears, but which didn't diminish in the slightest the grace of her delicate features. She wore a wine-colored silk dress, simple but clearly expensive, and a pearl necklace that shone softly under the chandelier lights. There was something in her eyes, deep brown, almost black, that conveyed ancient wisdom and, at the same time, a sadness that Mateo immediately recognized. It was the same sadness he saw in the mirror every morning since his grandmother, Carmen, had died 2 years before. Without fully understanding why, Mateo approached her. "Good evening, ma'am. May I offer you a canapé?" he said with a genuine smile, different from the protocol smile he had rehearsed for that night. The woman looked up and for a moment seemed surprised, as if no one had spoken to her with true warmth in a long time. "Thank you, young man. You're very kind," she responded with an accent that Mateo couldn't immediately identify. There was melody in that voice, a musicality that suggested distant origins and untold stories. "Forgive my boldness, but you seem a bit lost in this sea of people," Mateo commented, surprising himself with his own audacity. The woman laughed, a low musical laugh that illuminated her face in an almost magical way. Lost is an excellent word. I felt lost for a long time, actually. She paused, her eyes studying Mateo's face intently. "And you? Why is a young man with eyes so full of dreams serving canapés to people who probably won't even notice your existence?" The question was so direct, so penetrating, that Mateo found himself responding with an honesty he rarely shared with strangers. "I need to pay my bills. I'm studying literature at the university, but, well, books and ideals don't pay rent." "Literature," the woman exclaimed, and her eyes shone with genuine interest. "How wonderful! And what are you reading currently?" That simple question was the beginning of something neither of them expected. Mateo should have been circulating through the hall, attending to the other guests, but he found himself sitting in a chair next to that mysterious woman, discussing Cervantes' Borges, Lorca, and the complexities of Latin American magical realism. She spoke with surprising erudition, citing entire passages from memory, debating interpretations with insight that rivaled that of his most experienced professors. "You remind me of my late husband," she said softly, after almost an hour of conversation. He also loved words, the way they could build entire worlds from nothing. "I'm sorry for your loss," Mateo responded sincerely. "It was 3 years ago," she continued, and for the first time, Mateo noticed the simple gold wedding band she still wore. "Since then, I've lived in a kind of limbo. My children are busy with their own lives. My grandchildren barely know me. I've become invisible, you know. An old woman people pity, but with whom no one really wants to spend time." Mateo's heart clenched. These were words his grandmother, Carmen, might have said in her last years of life. "I don't think you're invisible," he said. "In fact, I think you're the most interesting person in this entire room." The woman smiled, and tears glistened in her eyes. "What's your name, kind young man?" Mateo Sandoval." "Layla," she replied, extending a delicate hand that Mateo shook carefully. "Layla Al-Mansour." That night, when the event ended and Mateo prepared to leave, Layla did something completely unexpected. She handed him a card with a phone number written by hand in blue ink. "I know this may seem strange, Mateo, but I'd like to continue our conversation, perhaps have coffee. I'll pay for your time, of course." "You don't need to pay me," Mateo protested immediately. "I'd very much like to talk with you again." And that's how it began. Over the following weeks, Mateo and Layla met regularly. It started with coffee in small cafes in the Gothic Quarter, then walks through Parc de la Ciutadella, visits to antique bookstores where Layla insisted on buying books for Mateo, despite his protests, and long conversations about literature, philosophy, art, and life. Mateo discovered that Layla was extraordinarily cultured. She spoke 5 languages fluently: Spanish, Arabic, French, English, and Italian. She had studied art history at the Sorbonne in the 1970s, lived in various countries, and possessed a private collection of first editions of classic books that would make any bibliophile cry with envy. "My life was complicated," she admitted during one of their meetings. "I grew up in a traditional family in Morocco, married very young to a man chosen by my parents. It was an arranged marriage, as was customary at that time." "Did you love him?" Mateo asked delicately. Layla was silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the cup of mint tea she held between her hands. "I learned to love him. He was a good man, powerful, but good. We had children. We built a life together. But it wasn't the kind of love poets write about, you know? It wasn't that overwhelming, desperate, free love." There was a deep melancholy in her voice that broke Mateo's heart. As time passed, something began to change. What had started as a friendship based on shared intellectual interests became something deeper. Mateo discovered that he thought about Layla constantly, about her fascinating stories, her musical laugh, the way her eyes sparkled when she talked about Renaissance art or Sufi poetry. He knew it was absurd. She was 71 years old enough to be his grandmother. But he couldn't deny what he felt: genuine affection, a connection that transcended age, appearance, or any social convention. And Layla, she had also changed. The lines of sadness around her eyes had softened. She laughed more, spoke with more enthusiasm, seemed alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. It was on a May afternoon while walking along Barceloneta Beach that Layla made the proposal that would change everything. "Mateo, I need to tell you something," she began, stopping and turning to look at him. The sea wind stirred her white hair, and the setting sun created a golden halo around her. In these last months, you've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever. The will to live, to wake up every day with expectation instead of resignation. Layla, let me finish, please, she interrupted gently. I know what I'm about to propose is unconventional, shocking, perhaps, but I need to ask. She took a deep breath. Would you marry me? Mateo was paralyzed, his words evaporating before reaching his lips. I know what you must be thinking, Layla continued quickly. I'm an old woman, you're young, it's crazy. But I'm not asking for a traditional marriage, Mateo. I don't expect physical intimacy or any obligations of that type. What I'm offering is a partnership, mutual companionship. Why was all Mateo managed to whisper. Because I'm dying, Layla said with devastating calmness. Pancreatic cancer, advanced stage. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe a year. And I don't want to spend that time alone in a hospital, surrounded by efficient but distant nurses and children who'll visit me out of obligation and guilty relief. Tears began to roll down Mateo's face. I want to spend my last days with someone who truly cares, who sees me as a person, not as a patient or a family obligation, she continued. And in return, I can guarantee that you'll finish your studies without financial worries. I can give you security, books, experiences. It's not romantic love, Mateo, but it's genuine. Mateo should have refused. It was what any sensible person would do. But when he looked at Layla, at that extraordinary woman who had brought so much light to his life in recent months, who laughed at his bad jokes, who discussed literature with passion, who made him feel seen and valued in a way no one else could, he knew his answer. Yes, he said, his voice breaking. Yes, I'll marry you. And there Mateo thought in that moment with complete sincerity was love. Not traditional romantic love, perhaps, but something equally powerful. Companionship, mutual respect, genuine affection. He thought it was love. The wedding took place 2 weeks later in a discreet civil ceremony, with only 2 witnesses that Layla hired especially for the occasion. She wore a simple beige linen dress. Mateo his only suit, the same one he had worn at the event where they met, but this time properly tailored. When they exchanged vows, Mateo felt a strange mixture of emotions, tenderness, apprehension, and an overwhelming sense of doing something simultaneously right and completely incomprehensible to the outside world. Until death do us part, they said in unison, and the weight of those words had never seemed so tangible. Mateo didn't tell his friends, nor his apartment mates. How could he explain? Oh, I married a 71-year-old woman I met at a charity event? They would think he was desperate for money, that he was a user, a gold digger, and maybe a small part of Mateo feared they might be right. After the ceremony, Layla took Mateo to her residence, and it was only then that he began to perceive there was much more to her story than she had revealed. Layla's apartment was, in reality, a stunning mansion in Pedralbes, one of Barcelona's most exclusive neighborhoods. The wrought iron gate opened automatically, revealing a meticulously maintained garden with marble fountains, antique rose bushes, and centuries-old trees. The house itself was an architectural masterpiece, 3 floors of classic elegance with sculpted stone balconies, enormous windows with Art Nouveau stained glass, and an interior that looked like it came from a museum. Layla, this is. Mateo was speechless as he walked through the entrance hall, his eyes wide at the crystal chandeliers, Persian rugs, paintings he recognized as works by renowned artists. My husband was successful, Layla said modestly, but there was something in her tone, a hesitation that Mateo couldn't decipher. The first days of marriage were surrealistically pleasant. Layla showed Mateo the house, including the 3-story private library that housed more than 10,000 volumes. She insisted that he choose one of the guest rooms to be his own space, respecting the agreement that their marriage would be platonic. They had breakfast together on the terrace overlooking the city. Layla taught Mateo to cook traditional Moroccan dishes: lamb tagine, couscous with 7 vegetables, almond pastries perfumed with rose water. They watched classic films in the private cinema room, debated philosophy while walking through the gardens, and Mateo read to her at night Garcia Marquez, Neruda, Pessoa, his voice filling the vast rooms with words that seemed to keep her anchored to the world of the living. "Do you have any regrets?" Layla asked on their 5th night as husband and wife, while drinking tea in the main living room. "None," Mateo responded honestly. "These have been the most peaceful and happy days I've had in a long time. And you?" "I should feel guilty," she admitted, "for tying you to a dying woman, but I'm too selfish to regret it. Your presence makes everything more bearable." It was that night that Layla began to cough, a deep, painful cough that made her entire body tremble. Mateo ran to help her, holding her while the coughing passed, his heart clenching at seeing small blood spots on the handkerchief she pressed against her lips. "It's getting worse," she said simply. "The doctor said it would be like this." "Is there anything I can do?" Mateo asked, feeling completely helpless. "You're already doing it," Layla replied, placing her wrinkled hand over his. "Just stay here." It was on the 7th day after the wedding that everything changed. Mateo had woken up early, as was his custom, and went down to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. Layla was still sleeping. She needed more rest lately, her body fighting a battle it couldn't win. While searching for sugar in one of the pantry cabinets, Mateo accidentally knocked over an old tin box that was hidden behind jars of spices. The lid opened, and various documents scattered across the marble floor. Kneeling to pick them up, Mateo began reading without thinking, and then he stopped, frozen. The first document was a death certificate, but it wasn't just anyone's certificate. It was the certificate of Sultan Hassan al-Mansour, deceased 3 years ago in Rabat, Morocco. Sultan. It couldn't be an actual title. It had to be a name, right? But as he continued examining the documents, all in Arabic, some in French, Mateo began to understand the impossible truth. There were photographs. Layla, decades younger, wearing luxurious, traditional clothing, next to a majestic-looking man in royal robes and a golden crown. Photographs in palaces, surrounded by servants, at official ceremonies with national flags in the background. There were legal documents, property contracts, certificates of noble titles. And then, at the bottom of the box, Mateo found an envelope sealed with red wax, addressed to him, "To my beloved husband, Mateo Sandoval, open after my death." Mateo's hands trembled so much he could barely hold the paper. He shouldn't open it, he knew. The envelope was clear. After her death, but his mind was spinning, trying to process what he had discovered. Layla wasn't just a wealthy widow. She had been married to a sultan, an actual sultan. Consciously violating the instructions, Mateo broke the seal and opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter in Layla's elegant and familiar handwriting, and several legal documents. He began to read, "My dear Mateo, if you're reading this, it means I finally departed from this world. I hope you respected my wish to open this envelope only after my death, but I know human curiosity well enough to suspect you may have opened it earlier. I don't blame you if that's the case. There are so many things I didn't tell you, So many truths I kept hidden not out of dishonesty, but out of fear. Fear that you would see me differently. Fear that the weight of my story would destroy the pure simplicity of what we built together. My late husband, Hassan al-Mansur, wasn't just a wealthy man. He was the Sultan of the ancient Emirate of Zafran, a small nation in North Africa that existed for centuries before being annexed to Morocco in the 1980s. Although the emirate no longer exists politically, the wealth, properties, and titles remained with our family. I married Hassan when I was only 18 years old. It wasn't my choice. It was an arrangement between powerful families, a political alliance disguised as marriage. For 53 years, I was his wife. I had his children, 3 sons and 2 daughters. I lived in palaces, wore jewelry worth fortunes, met kings and presidents, and I was deeply unhappy. Hassan was a good man in his way. He never physically hurt me, provided generously for me and our children. What I was a possession, Mateo. A pretty piece in his collection of power symbols. He had other wives, concubines, and I simply had to accept, smile, and play my role. When he died 3 years ago, I expected to finally find freedom. But I discovered I was trapped in a different cage, the cage of family expectations. My children had inherited their father's greed. They saw the vast wealth Hassan had left and fought among themselves like dogs fighting over bones. They treated me like an expensive inconvenience, an obligation. They visited me on holidays with fake smiles, asked about my health while clearly calculating how much longer they would have to wait for the inheritance. And then I met you. A poor student with eyes full of dreams and a genuine heart who saw me, really saw me, not as a sultana, not as a wealthy old woman, but as Layla, just Layla, a woman who loved books, who longed for real conversations, who laughed at silly jokes and cried listening to poetry. When I discovered I was dying, I made a decision. I wouldn't leave my fortune to children who never truly loved me, who never gave me what I most desired, true companionship in my last days. By marrying you, Mateo, I changed my will. Most of the assets are protected in trusts for my grandchildren. They are innocent and shouldn't suffer for their parents' failings. But there's a considerable portion that now belongs to you, my legal husband. According to the attached documents, you will inherit this property in Pedralbes, valued at 12 million euros, the apartment in Paris where I studied when young, 3.5 million euros, the villa in Tangier overlooking the Strait of Gibraltar, 2 million euros, a trust fund worth 25 million euros with annual interest that will guarantee your financial security for the rest of your life. My private collection of rare books, estimated value of 4 million euros. Various works of art and jewelry, combined value of approximately 8 million euros. The property rights to 3 commercial buildings in Barcelona, passive income of approximately 400,000 euros per year. I know you must be shocked, maybe angry that I didn't tell you the complete truth, maybe questioning whether everything was manipulation on my part. But you need to believe me when I say what we felt together, the conversations, the laughter, the peace we found in each other's company, it was all genuine. I didn't marry you to have a convenient heir. I married you because for the first time in 71 years, I felt truly happy. You gave me something no amount of money could buy. Dignity in my last days, companionship without ulterior motives, kindness without expectations. Use this inheritance wisely, my dear Mateo. Finish your studies. Write the book I know lives inside you. Travel. Love. Live the life I could never live. And if you can, from time to time, remember old Layla, who loved listening to you read poetry at sunset. With all my genuine affection, Layla. Mateo read the letter 3 times, silent tears running down his face. His hands trembled as he examined the attached legal documents, all authentic, all already registered in his name. He was no longer a poor student struggling to pay rent. He was, inexplicably, absurdly, one of the wealthiest men in Spain. You opened it. Layla's voice came from the pantry doorway. She was leaning on the frame, wearing a blue silk robe, looking fragile but dignified. Mateo jumped, the pages falling from his hands. Layla, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. It's okay, she interrupted him, entering slowly. Part of me expected you to open it earlier. Curiosity is human. Why didn't you tell me? Mateo asked, his voice breaking. About who you really were, about all of this. Layla sighed, sitting on a wooden stool with some difficulty. Because I wanted you to know me as Layla, not as Sultana al-Mansur, not as a woman with an incomprehensible fortune, but just as me, a lonely old woman who loved books and longed for genuine companionship. What if I had refused to marry you if I had known? Mateo questioned. Then it would have been your choice, Layla replied simply, but it would have been based on the wrong circumstances. I wanted your decision to be about me, not about my money. Mateo knelt in front of her, taking her wrinkled hands in his. Do you think I married you for money? No, Layla said with conviction. I know you didn't. That's why I'm leaving you everything. Because I know you didn't marry me expecting anything in return. But your children, Mateo began. My children were comfortably wealthy when Hassan died, Layla said, with a hint of bitterness. And they'll still receive generously from other trusts after my death. But this portion, this is for you, for the person who gave me something infinitely more valuable than they ever gave. Unconditional love. Until he saw the truth, Mateo whispered, remembering the moment on the beach when Layla proposed marriage, when he thought he completely understood what he was accepting. The truth, Layla repeated. It's liberating, isn't it? Now you know everything, and you can choose. You can stay with me for my last months, simply because you want to, not out of obligation or expectation. Or you can leave, and the inheritance will still be yours. It's legally guaranteed. Mateo didn't hesitate. He pulled Layla into a careful embrace, conscious of her fragility. I'm staying, he said firmly. Not for the money, Layla. I'm staying because I care about you. Because these last months have been some of the best of my life. Because you deserve to have someone by your side who truly cares when... He couldn't finish the sentence, but Layla understood. When I die, she completed softly. Thank you, Mateo. You don't know what this means to me. The following months were simultaneously the most beautiful and the most painful of Mateo's life. Layla gradually worsened, as the doctors had predicted. There were good days when she laughed and conversed animatedly, planning trips they both knew they would never take. And there were bad days when the pain was so intense that all Mateo could do was hold her hand and read to her, his voice struggling to remain steady while she moaned softly. He met Layla's children when they finally came to visit. Rashid, Omar, Aziz, Fatima, and Yasmin. The hostility was immediate and palpable when they discovered their mother had remarried. He's a gold digger, Rashid, the eldest, accused openly during a tense family meeting. A poor student who seduced our mother while she was vulnerable. Watch your words, Layla said, with a weak but authoritative voice, rising from her wheelchair with difficulty. Mateo has been more of a son to me in these last months than any of you have been in the last 3 years. The silence that followed was icy. "You visit me twice a year if I'm lucky," Layla continued, each word costing her effort. "You call me on obligatory holidays. You send cards written by assistants. And now that I'm dying, you finally show up, not out of concern, but because you fear what will happen to the money." "Mother, that's not fair," Fatima began. "Not fair?" Layla laughed bitterly. "What's not fair is having spent 53 years in an arranged marriage, having raised you five alone while your father collected wives and concubines. And now, finally, when I find a bit of genuine happiness in my last days, having to justify my choices to children who never really cared." The meeting ended with the children leaving furiously, threatening legal challenges and investigations. "They can't do anything," Layla assured Mateo afterward, exhausted but resolute. "My lawyers ensured the will is uncontestable. I was in full mental capacity when I drafted it, with multiple witnesses." "I'm sorry for causing this rupture in your family," Mateo said sadly. "You didn't cause anything," Layla replied. "That rupture already existed decades ago. You just made it visible." Layla died on a November morning, 6 months after the wedding, exactly within the doctor's prognosis. Mateo was by her side, holding her hand, reading her favorite poem, "If You Forget Me" by Pablo Neruda. "I want you to know one thing," he read softly, his voice faltering. "Mateo," Layla whispered, interrupting him. Her voice was so weak, he had to lean in to hear. "Thank you for everything, for seeing me, for staying, for making me remember what it's like to be alive." "I should be thanking you," Mateo replied, tears flowing freely. "You changed my life completely." "Promise me one thing," Layla asked, her brown eyes, now clouded with the nearness of death, fixed on his face. "Don't waste what I'm leaving you. Don't hoard it out of guilt or feeling undeserving. Use it. Live. Write. Love, be happy. That's the only thing I truly want." "I promise," Mateo swore, kissing her forehead. Layla smiled, one last flash of that luminosity he had first seen in the hotel months ago. He thought it was love, she whispered in imperfect Spanish, her last words a reference to the phrase Mateo had once said, describing how he imagined love would be when he was a child. Until he saw the truth. The truth is, it was love. True, genuine, unexpected love. And then she closed her eyes and departed, her hands still warm in his, a soft smile remaining on her lips. 3 years have passed since Layla's death. Mateo, now 26 years old, was sitting in the 3-story library that once belonged to her, working on the manuscript of his first book, a memoir titled The Sultana and the Student, an unlikely love story. He had finished his literature studies with the highest honors. He had traveled Paris, Tangier, Marrakesh, Cairo, all the places Layla had spoken of with nostalgia. He established a foundation in her name that offered scholarships for poor students interested in literature and arts. Layla's children had indeed contested the will, as she predicted, but the lawyers she hired were the best, and every challenge was denied. Eventually, they gave up, though Mateo knew they still hated him. He didn't care. He had the peace of knowing he had made Layla happy in her last months, that he had been genuine, that the love they shared, though unconventional, though brief, was real. Sometimes, at night, when he walked through the garden she loved so much, Mateo could swear he heard her musical laugh in the wind, or caught the scent of rose water, her favorite perfume, floating in the air. He thought it was love until he saw the truth. But the truth, Mateo had learned was that love came in infinitely varied forms. It wasn't just burning romance and youthful passion. It could be companionship between two lonely souls. It could be finding someone who truly saw you. It could be an old sultana and a young student, unlikely and impossible, but true nonetheless. And that truth, more than any fortune he had inherited, was the greatest gift Layla had given him. True love knows no age, borders, or conventions. It exists simply where two hearts meet and say, "Here, with you, I am home."